Chuckle Brothers, that's what they're calling you.
Ian Paisley's decision to share power with Martin McGuinness has brought him international prestige and local lows.
I'm upset because everything we have been taught has been turned right round and stood on its head. The man that we both loved, respected and followed has hurt the people of Northern Ireland.
No longer moderator of the church he founded.
What about your other jobs, Dr. Paisley?
Well, all our jobs are staying, they're staying where they are.
Change is coming, they're preparing people.
Somebody somewhere is stirring it up.
On the class clown coming in now.
If he does step aside, who will win the race to succeed him?
And there's Nigel Dodds on Legal Eagles coming up well on the stand side. There's Peter Robinson on I Can See Clearly Now. And then Ian Paisley Jr. on My Dad's Bigger Than Your Dad.
Those who wanted to get to this point, who couldn't themselves get there, now that they have attained that, and Ian Paisley has served his purpose in that regard, will increasingly and patiently want to push him aside, and I think that's what you're beginning to see unfold.
Tonight we ask how soon and how smooth that succession will be, who will replace him, and what style of future government can we expect from the DUP. It was at a church hall in County Down over half a century ago that Ian Paisley's career began. 57 years later, he's being replaced as the leader of the church he created. But nobody's keen to talk about why.
Can I ask how you feel, Dr. Paisley?
I feel the very best, my friend. The very best.
Are you happy to see Dr. Paisley going this evening?
I have no comment to make at all.
What about yourself, sir? Are you happy to see him going?
No comment to make.
Did you have a vote last time?
No comment to make, mate.
The recent vote taken on a bleak night at Dungannon Free Presbyterian Church was really sparked by a meeting last summer. In September, the church hierarchy had met for what, for 50 years, had been the routine re-election of Dr. Paisley as moderator, but it didn't go according to Paisley's plan.
Ian Paisley was taken aback by the strength of feeling in that meeting, and it was a very emotional meeting, and it became very clear to him on the night quite quickly that he had a problem, or he would divide the church if he was to stand again. Now, there were a lot of people in that room at the Martyrs Memorial who were ready to back Ian Paisley and support him. But I think he looked at the situation and he weighed up his love of the church, 50 years as moderator, and I'm sure he didn't want his legacy to be that being First Minister divided the church.
And so 5 months later, the elders deliberated over his replacement while refreshments were prepared. After an hour, Dr. Paisley unexpectedly emerged with his successor.
Let me introduce you to my very good friend and brother.
It was the start of a separation of Paisley's profiles, preacher and politician.
Has this been a painful process for you, Dr. Paisley?
Painful, do look as if I'm in pain.
What about your other jobs, Dr. Paisley?
Well, all our jobs are staying, they're staying where they are. And let me just say this off the record to you. At this door, no Dublin newspaper will chase Ian Paisley out of his job in Ulster.
After the meeting, I spoke to some who had attended.
Do you think that the recent politics had much to do with the church decision?
I don't take anything to do with politics at all. I've enough to do in the church without politics.
Dr. Paisley has done a really good job, and I'm not saying anything more than that.
Do we look unhappy?
It's a key moment in Paisley's career because until now he has been the boss in both parts of his life. But now that he's had to give up the leadership of the church, many believe there is pressure on him to give up the leadership of his party. 2 weeks ago, the Irish Times claimed Dr. Paisley was to stand down as MP at the next election. The next day, his son failed to dismiss questions regarding his replacement.
I must say, I think it's pretty clear where the succession is.
When rumours of your departure start to become current, and even your junior minister and your son doesn't rule them out of hand, then that's a situation where leadership becomes more difficult. The whole issue it keeps as Ian Jr. said, it'll just keep coming up. When's he going?
There could be a Westminster general election in 2009, but there's also a European election, and the DUP have serious thoughts required about who's going to be their candidate. And then, of course, there's the next Assembly election. Now, they need to have a decision who is going to lead them into the Assembly election. Is Ian Paisley going to be the candidate for North Antrim just to be an MP? Is he still going to be the leader of the DUP? All those questions need to be answered pretty soon.
I have a feeling Paisley's going to go. Ian Paisley. The fact that he's no longer a moderator will have an impact. Just within the last literally few weeks, I've come to the view or the feeling that it's not going to last much longer, the Paisley dynasty.
What we're hearing is some whispers that the succession is now openly being talked about. Even 6 months ago, that was inconceivable. In fact, 6 or 9 months ago, I think there was some fairly swift moves from the party to dampen any such public speculation. Seems less the case these days.
While the DUP may be ready to move on, it's Ian Paisley's change in image that appears to have annoyed some of the former party faithful. It's hard to measure just how widespread this discontent is at the moment, but there's no doubting how raw some feelings are.
And we are so sad that we've come to this day, a day we never ever thought we would see in our history, that our DUP leader would now welcome the Free State Minister, a man who's told us from a foreign state who's out to take us over.
Compare the Paisley of 5 years ago to the Paisley of 5 days ago. In 2003, he was in uproar when the Taoiseach visited Hillsborough Castle for political talks.
Who the heck does Ahern think he is? And who the heck do they think they are that they're going to deceive the entire Unionist community? The entire Unionist community are raging mad about what is happening. It's great to welcome you, sir. And this is a very historic day, because this is a day when we're going to see something that ties us both together for the good of all our people.
Some feel the change reflects his new position in Northern Ireland. For years the outsider, he's happier as the man in power.
He did want to be the Protestant leader of Ulster and to be top dog. I mean, that's always been the case.
I don't believe even a year back it could have been envisaged that we would be together here. But
what I'm saying, you see, he's in under my control, so there's some hope for me.
Paisley's long journey to the top owes much to another key figure in the party, Peter Robinson.
I don't think the personal chemistry was ever that wonderful. I don't think the political alignment was perfect. I think there were many occasions when they saw things differently. But Peter was very good at not revealing any of that publicly, while all the time working carefully at his own strategy and getting Ian Paisley to the point he wanted to get him to.
There's something happening here.
Paisley founded the DUP after an IRA bomb on the Shankill in 1971. Another explosion drew the young East Belfast estate agent to the party. He lost a childhood friend in the attack. Robinson would gradually become the key strategist, but it was Paisley's charisma and hardline image that drove the party in the early years.
That is an absolute lie.
Well, are you prepared to go in?
Anybody, that man there is a rebel from the south of Ireland. He's not a worker here at all.
Are you prepared to
I
go
don't know who you're listening to.
The Ulster Workers' Council strike of 1974 gave Paisley his first real taste of political leadership. Ironically, both the DUP and Sinn Féin opposed the Irish Dimension and power sharing enshrined in the Sunningdale Agreement. Along with anti-power sharing Ulster Unionists, Paisley helped bring down the executive.
The choice of Ireland is the heaven you say it is. We'll send you all to heaven.
The period also revealed his and his deputies' flirtation with paramilitaries. Paisley was on a roll, or so he thought. In 1977 he tried to go it alone and launched a day of action. It was crushed convincingly and reported at the time that Paisley was finished. He never did fulfil that promise to resign.
He is a moral coward in my view, because he will not tackle the things that are difficult. It's easy to stand and tub thump and whip up the boys and seem as if you're a great big fella. The difficult thing is to actually challenge your own people and say, no, you're wrong. And he never did that.
Tensions between the two emerged in 1986 when the deputy led a protest at poor border security by marching men into Monaghan. Paisley was in the States and the press hailed it as Robinson's bid for the leadership. Such was the speculation that the party was forced to hold a press conference denying it.
It suggests that I am going behind his back trying to take over leadership, when anything I do behind his back is giving him support. Dr. Paisley is the leader of the Democratic Unionist Party and has my full support and will continue to have my full support.
But it was only a year before a real rift emerged. In 1987, Peter Robinson gave his first indication that he would at least be prepared to discuss power sharing. He and two Ulster Unionists were told by their party leaders to produce a report looking at potential ways forward in the political process.
The one time when we can remember a visible and outward strain was a task force report in 87.
The only thing Westminster would support would be the Irish dimension and power sharing. That was magnified again in the Anglo-Irish Agreement, and I think that generation of Unionists realised that they were going to have to look at a deal within those parameters.
The report riled the party leaders, and the impact was huge.
So huge, in fact, that when it went to both parties, it was rejected. Peter Robinson, I think that was the stage he resigned as deputy leader of the Democratic Unionist Party and went into a sort of semi-wilderness.
Here was an indication that the deputy wasn't a man to merely toe the party line.
I intend to remain a member of the Democratic Unionist Party. I have a lot of time, effort, work and hope invested in this party, and I continue to work for its success. I wish both Dr. Paisley and Mr. Molyneux every success in their talks with the government.
Robinson was coaxed back a year later, but while the DUP remained firmly opposed to any dialogue with Sinn Féin, he travelled the following year to Germany for talks.
All four men came here with the full knowledge, consent and backing of their leaders. In 1.5 days here, they spent more than 12 hours locked in discussion.
Unknown at the time, a Republican representative was present, Alec Reid, the priest later nominated by the IRA to witness decommissioning.
Well, we all got on very well together. We met in a room round a table. I remember saying afterwards about Peter Robinson, his bark is much worse than his bite, because I found him the same as the others. He was just as reasonable, just as open.
Unknown to the electorate, Robinson was quietly bucking the DUP trend. It wasn't the last time the deputy was to prove more progressive than his leader. After the ceasefires, Paisley opposed the multi-party talks at Stormont. Robinson travelled to take part in different discussions in South Africa, albeit separately from Sinn Féin. It was stressed that he attended in a personal capacity. But the results of the referendum following the Good Friday Agreement brought a crushing defeat for the DUP.
Yes, 71.12%.
For the first time, a small part of their traditional vote rose vocally against them.
Ian, where are you going to take us?
The Crown don't to New York, Mark 1 and Mark 2. See,
not to Dublin anyhow.
Well, I wish you would walk out.
An overwhelming endorsement of the agreement left Paisley and Robinson faced with a choice: to boycott the devolved institutions or to change tack and take up seats in Stormont. They developed a new strategy: opposition from within, a power-sharing executive.
The DUP strategy seemed to be to wrong-foot Trimble at every opportunity, on the basis that what he was doing was wrong and they wouldn't do it themselves. And therefore, every time there was an IRA robbery, there was outrage, quite properly, from the DUP about why are you sitting in government with people like this.
The tactic was effective.
Hello, how are you?
2003 brought the day Ian Paisley had been waiting for. The DUP finally became the biggest party in the Assembly.
Great day for Ulster.
Sinn Féin took the largest nationalist vote, and publicly a deal looked impossible. But within the DUP lay huge ambition to govern, and pressure paid off with the decommissioning and disbandment of the IRA. Paisley now had room to manoeuvre at negotiations at St Andrews in Scotland.
It certainly appeared that he opposed settlements until he was in a position to be in charge, until he was actually the man concluding it. Plus, of course, that he did get most of what he wanted from the IRA.
In later interviews, Paisley claimed he'd been faced with the prospect of an unwelcome Irish dimension if a deal wasn't reached. It was referred to as Plan B.
How would have I faced my people if I had allowed this country to have the Union destroyed and a setting up of a joint government by the South of Ireland, which the South of Ireland also claimed, as well as Mr. Hayne. But we're going to take us over. And do you think I wanted to have Plan B? No.
Jim Allister was at the negotiations.
It was all, as far as I could see, about attaining the desire with which he'd become besotted of being First Minister, and whatever it took, it would be done. In all the many months after St Andrews, when I was being difficult about moving into government with Sinn Féin, never once did Ian Paisley say, just wait a minute, Jim, let me tell you what's going to happen if we don't go for this. Now, does anyone seriously think that if there had been a genuine, serious Plan B, that conversation would not have taken place? Of course it would.
Ironically, though, it's only the fact that he's made it to First Minister that has forced him to officially separate the roles of preacher and politician. To avoid division in his church, he stepped down as its moderator.
I think probably with the background of the IRA and so on, yes, it does niggle. A situation had developed, there's no question about that.
Not an inch and no surrender.
Some, like DUP founding member and Free Presbyterian Roy Gillespie, left the party because of the deal.
He's making peace. Well, you'll make peace if you join those who have guns and bombs and give unto them and blew up our kith and kin and did coffins in the graves. You'll have peace if you bring them into government. If I go out and shoot you today, I don't expect to be set in the Parliament tomorrow.
Has this been a painful process for you, Dr. Paisley?
Painful, do look as if I'm in pain.
But as Dr. Paisley pointed out in his first sermon after stepping down as moderator, it has hurt.
Strange things have happened. The voices raised against me especially are not the voices of familiar enemies, but they're the voices of our so-called friends. People who claim to be the friends of this preacher have caused him to be wounded. And I regret that. I'm sorry for that. And some of these people owe their souls to me.
So will Dr. Paisley step aside to avoid dissent within the DUP as he did in the church? Or will he be pushed?
No Dublin newspaper will chase Ian Paisley out of his job in Ulster.
But according to one former insider, the pressure may come from within the party.
It's not a novel idea within the DUP to seek to get beyond the Paisley leadership. I know that at times past there have been discussions about that. I'm sure Peter Robinson is itching to get into the First Minister's office. I'm sure his impatience at taking over the driving seat himself is growing by the day. I think those who wanted to get to this point, who couldn't themselves get there, now that they have attained that, and Ian Paisley has served his purpose in that regard, will increasingly impatiently want to push him aside, and I think that's what you're beginning to see unfold.
We did, of course, invite Dr. Paisley and other members of the DUP to take part in the programme, but they declined. So who will fill the biggest shoes in Northern Irish politics?
There are undoubtedly two people within the DUP who have the capacity to be the leader, and they are Peter Robinson and Nigel Dodds. Both are good politicians. Both could do the job. Nigel will probably bottle out of any contest.
It's complicated. People want to get on to the next stage, and I think there are possibly deals to be done as well between the kind of various factions within the party. There was a time when people were saying Dodds is Paisley's actual favourite to take over.
Senior figures within the DUP are preparing for Peter Robinson to lead the party after Paisley, with Nigel Dodds as deputy. Others, like Gregory Campbell, can expect top ministerial positions, but the idea was floated that the First Minister and the leader of the party positions may be separated. We're told that that is no longer being considered.
Oh, of course they make a good team. I mean, they would just get on with the business. These guys are good at running offices. They're good at being ministers.
So how will the style at Stormont change under Peter Robinson's guidance?
I imagine what will happen is that Peter Robinson, around whom a lot of that younger generation will look to for patronage, will probably introduce a period of, not an ice age exactly, but something of a more arm's length relationship with Sinn Féin.
The party has modernised massively in the past few years. Control is quietly centralising around key, unelected strategists.
There are some very able people, a number of whom would have personal loyalty to Peter Robinson, who have been cultivated and brought in and encouraged in that department, and some of whom are biding their time, perhaps elsewhere, and awaiting the day when the man that they really wish to serve is in a position to be served.
The DUP is very strictly managed, and that's internally, and then in an external sense in terms of dealing with the media and dealing with the public. It's a very tight operation, and that reflects Peter Robinson's character and personality.
This apparent control reached the point where DUP MLAs were required to sign contracts, a breach of which would incur party discipline and even fines.
He was the architect of that. Within that contract there is almost a Stalinist tendency, which is quite frightening. And if that proceeds to manifest itself in the day-to-day management and control of the DUP, then I don't think it will build for a very happy picture.
I think Robinson is both the most powerful man in the party. Now, after the deal, bar no one, including the Doc. He doesn't own the party, but he has a very powerful following.
He's the sort of man that will leave work at 10, 11 o'clock at night and go home and work on a speech or work on an internal party document on his computer, hammering away until all hours of the morning, and be first up the next morning and be in the office shouting at somebody about a newspaper headline or why haven't we done this or why aren't we doing that. He's a very, very driven man, and he's the man behind the success of the DUP.
Dr. Paisley is 82 this April. Although he likes to confound speculation and appears to have more energy than a man half his age, change will happen at some point. The only question is when.
In the last 6 months, we've entered, I suppose, what you could say is the beginning of the end game for Ian Paisley politically. But there's no doubt, I mean, if you're in a political party, the DUP, with Peter Robinson, a strategist like that, of course they're looking ahead, of course they're planning.
The devolution of policing and justice now looks likely to be delayed until the autumn, and it had been thought that Ian Paisley's seal would be required to sell any deal to the party faithful. But we're being told that that's no longer a consideration for MLAs.
He's still very powerful within the DUP, and he's in a position to secure his own future, the future of his son, in an overall deal at this point. Again, if he waits a long time, that could change, as it changed in the church.
And Paisley does have the potential, at least, to secure a legacy and a dynasty in both the political and preaching elements of his life. Attempts were made to install his son, Reverend Ian Paisley, at Martyrs Memorial. The proposal didn't get sufficient support from the congregation.
I think he has shown himself over the years as having something of a blind spot in terms of family promotion. Who else has ever thought it right or appropriate to have their own wife nominated to the House of Lords?
But if such plans are on his mind, recent developments have made accession difficult.
The only circumstances in which in the short term I can anticipate Ian Jr. continuing to have a significant role is if, as the price of getting rid of Ian Paisley Sr. as leader, Peter Robinson has to do a deal with Ian Sr. on the basis that he'll look after the boy.
Despite being the creator of church and party, he will find it tough to shape his legacy as he might like. Kyle is not in Martyrs. Ian Jr. looks to be a long way from leadership. Some query whether the alternatives are to his liking either.
At the end of it all, I'm not sure that if Ian Paisley was left to bequeath his crown, that he would bequeath it to Peter Robinson.
You can only judge a person by where they started and where they finished. The abiding memory of Paisley's beginning was at Stormont in 1965.
He hurled snowballs at the car of Taoiseach Jack Lynch.
The only ammunition we had was iced water. We gave him iced water for his drink.
It's a far cry from the present Paisley.
I heard that they had a prayer meeting on their helicopter coming up, praying there'd be no snow for Paisley to throw.
That same man is now sitting up in Stormont. He's sharing offices and power with a member of the IRA Army Council.
I think Northern Ireland will suffer in the absence of Paisley for a number of reasons. First of all, the fact that he is there symbolises the change that has come across Northern Ireland in the last 18 months. The other aspect is that no matter who is the leader of the DUP, whether it's Peter Robinson, Nigel Dodds or anyone else, to be quite honest, nobody outside Northern Ireland has ever heard of Peter Robinson or Nigel Dodds. And the fact that he can go to Washington or he can go to London or Brussels and bat for Northern Ireland is something that will be missed when he's gone.
I'm convinced we will never see the like of such an individual in our time, religiously speaking.
This is the way that O'Neill wants to play it. We declare our intention from this platform that we will organise massive demonstrations continually.
Predicting the political progress of Ian Paisley is an almost impossible proposition. He thrives on surprise and quick comments that confuse. His stubbornness is legendary, and until recently, he has almost always done his own thing, regardless of the pressure upon him.
Always force. No change.
Very good.
Not an inch and no surrender.
But never before has talk of his retirement been so open, and he has never before relinquished a position so important to him as the leadership of his own church.